Hi there, I'm Antony of RevolutionaryJam and it's June of 2008. I've been really looking forward to today's video because I've been meaning to make it for ages. It was originally intended as the follow-up to my previous video on distribution of wealth, which you can find a link to in the sidebar, as well as some other further reading. Today's topic is foreign aid and exploitation of the third world. It's a commonly held belief that we help the poorest countries in the world by giving them aid, and it's a sad fact that they actually give us a great deal more than we give them. Let me explain with a quick history lesson. In the 1970s, when Middle Eastern countries increased the price of their oil, they invested their new wealth in Western banks, which in turn invested the money in the third world. This was seen to be a sure investment, as countries don't tend to disappear and go under in the same way that unsuccessful corporations do. Unfortunately, most of the money was lent to military governments and tyrants who had no intention of spending the money on their people, and now those people are suffering from a burden of debt which they didn't even create. The International Monetary Fund will tell the governments of these countries to increase exports to pay back these loans for the profit of Western multinationals. The same multinationals who buy a vast area of growing land which they don't even plant, only to ensure that peasants don't have the means to provide for themselves, and so they have to work on whatever terms are given to them. The increase in exports often causes a glut in the market, so no additional income is even gained by these countries, and as a result their governments will cut funds for healthcare, education, food subsidies and water supplies to grow cash crops for the West, even while their people starve. I mean, consider that Ethiopia was still exporting food at the very height of their famine, and Brazil, one of the greatest exporters of food in the world, still has hundreds of thousands dying from hunger-related illnesses. The money these countries raise by selling their natural resources is generally spent on Western manufactured goods, because our governments impose trade barriers to stop them from exporting their own manufactured goods. That would not be good for our economic growth figure, and it would also give them a sort of independence from us that certain business interests wouldn't be approving of. We stipulate that a high percentage of aid money is spent on manufactured goods from the country who provided the aid, and that's merely to subsidise industry at home. There are some shocking examples of this. One is that in 1986 the British government strong-armed the Indian government into accepting aid in the form of 21 Westland helicopters that they didn't want or need, just by saying they weren't likely to receive the aid in any other form. The cost of just one of those helicopters represented the entire development programme for Ethiopia, and that wasn't by any means an isolated incident. In other words, aid is currently just a form of corporate welfare, and if that point needs any further highlighting, consider that a great deal of aid's money is given in arms, for goodness sake. I mean, yeah, that's going to feed empty bellies. A myth we've been hearing all too often in the media is that if the third world were allowed to develop, it would be some sort of environmental disaster. But that's not so. Countries with wealth can afford to clean up their water after fouling it, they can afford to replant their forests, and they can afford to put recycling infrastructure into place. Countries without wealth can't do that. Isn't this obvious? I mean, in places like Bangladesh, people scramble to make a living with no long-term consideration to their surrounding environment, and they have no means of repairing it afterwards. Do starving Brazilians really have a choice over whether they cut down the rainforest or not? It's not progress, but our irresponsible economic systems which are to blame for the damage that the developed world is currently causing to the earth. And you can learn more about that if you watch my video Economic Growth, Gross Deception, which I'll also put a link to in the sidebar. Now, what about overpopulation in the developing world? Well, all I can say is that the Industrial Revolution actually created population booms across the whole planet, but in every single country where a reasonable standard of living was achieved, population growth rates receded. Now, there's no reason to believe that that will be any different with the developing world. Once their families are secure, and also education will be able to play a bigger role. One thing that Bono and Bob Geldof don't tell you is that when they talk about dropping third world debt, they don't even really mean dropping it. They mean transferring it over to Western governments who are already completely debt riddled by irresponsible public spending and illegal wars and other abhorrences. Now, if these celebrities really want to make a difference, what they should be doing is organising mass petitioning and boycotts of the banks concerned, to the point where it's actually in the favour of their shareholders to write off the debt completely. If we really believe in freedom and prosperity, we have to believe in it for everyone, not just the select few who can afford to pay for it. And that's why the Western world has to stop exploiting the third world and start incorporating it. And here's the most important bit. How can we help? Well, one way is by switching to fair trade products and recycled products wherever possible. To quote, "Fair trade is a trading partnership based on dialogue, transparency and respect that seeks greater equity in international trade. It contributes to sustainable development by offering better trading conditions to and securing the rights of marginalised producers and workers." In fact, fair trade has gained a greater market share year after year, and that's really a sign of the times. It's a sign that people are really starting to wake up and care about these issues. To those ends, I've included a link to a list of links for ethical and sustainable purchasing if you want to have a look at them. Another thing we could do to help, for those of us who have the time and commitment, is voluntary service overseas, and you can find out about that at www.vso.org.uk, and I've included that in a link in the sidebar as well. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Antony of Revolutionary Jam, and goodbye.